Hi, everybody. This is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. So today is November 29th, 2021. And I wanted to do a little bit of a whiteboard video. I haven't done one of these in a long time and talk to you guys a bit about some things that are occurring on Cardano. First off, we have a lot of people running around and who are saying, "Oh, it's a ghost chain, nothing's going on, rah rah rah." And actually, if you go to this interesting website, let me just bring it up here in a second. So let me share my screen. Share screen. Wah! There we go. Okay, so Cardano Cube, it's right here. And I didn't mean to do that. StreamYard. There we go. All right. So Cardano Cube, if you take a look at this, right here, you have a whole bunch of different things that are launching on Cardano. So you have like Space Babes and SHIB and Hosky token and all these swaps and so forth. And you take a look at Explore projects and all kinds of projects. Here's kind of the ecosystem map. And these are just some things that are known. And people are building. They actually reach out to us. Like, for example, we've been working a little bit with the Sunday Swap team because we were curious about what could be done to optimize some of their smart contracts. And we found ways by just reducing the usage of higher order functions and by doing some clever things with strict and sometimes lazy evaluation, we were able to reduce the size by 35% and the memory consumption by about the same. Really exciting stuff. But there was an article recently about MELD right here. And if you take a look at MELD, you'll see ISPO 1 billion emerging use case for Cardano crypto fundraising. So it says nearly 40,000 participants stake nearly 620 million ADA as part of MELD's first ever initial stake pool offering, which concluded October 27th. And then it kind of interviews the CEO and everything, and they're going to make a bunch of money, basically do this. So what the hell is an ISPO? Well, okay, we don't have an official definition, but the one I understand is basically that you have a stake pool operator. So they register a stake pool. And normally what happens is that somebody is going to delegate to the stake pool operator. Okay. And then what happens is that person, ... and all the other people that delegate to them are basically working together. And this increases their percentage chance of getting the right to make a block. Okay. And basically, if they have the right, they have to do it. If they do it, then the Cardano blockchain will distribute some rewards to each of the people who delegated. And then the stake pool operator gets a fee, basically for assisting in the construction of the work. Okay. And that's a pretty established model. And we've been doing this since Shelley as an ecosystem. And there's over 3,000 stake pool operators. So an ISPO says, well, wait a minute here. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to basically say, we're going to run a pool and you delegate to us, and I'll use a different color. How about purple? You delegate to us, and and we'll have 100% fee or something like that, some amount of fee, maybe 100%. And we're going to keep the ADA that's made. So some fee that's large, and we're going to keep the ADA. And then what's going to happen is you're going to get tokens back for that. So it's kind of like a swap. But the difference here is that the underlying ADA that's possessed by the people delegating, that ADA is not lost. It doesn't go anywhere. It's not like an ICO where you send a cryptocurrency to an address and receive a token back. You basically just bet on a stake pool. You keep your delegation preference there for a while. You get some sort of cryptographic receipt, and then you get your ADA back. Okay, so that's what I've been able to glean for ISPOs. Now, there's a lot of debates whether these are good for small stake pools or not, and there's an interesting regulatory question that's behind it. So some people say, well, this is not a securities offering because there's no value exchange. You're basically getting the other token without necessarily transferring value. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's not a problem. In fact, if you take a look at this right here, it's an article from August 21st, 2018, and it talks about airdrops and enforcement actions against airdrops. So the idea there is under certain circumstances, however, bona fide gift of securities is not deemed to involve the offer of the sale of those securities, and under the no sale theory, the registration requirement of federal security laws do not apply to the purported gift. The SEC would argue differently. Okay. So when we take a look at case of airdrops, there could be an argument made that an ISPO could still constitute a securities offering, especially if there's a desire to create project capital to finance the development of that project. Okay. And another thing that's happened right around the same time is that the infrastructure bill got passed, and the infrastructure bill has a crypto broker reporting requirement. So basically, the bill it says that you have to report a litany of information about the people who delegate to you. And if you don't report that information, there could be consequences with the IRS, including fines, potentially criminal charges. You see another thing right here. It says another provision opposed by the crypto industry essentially requires recipients of transactions over $10,000 to verify the sender's personal information and record his or her social security number, the nature of the transaction, other information, report the transaction to the government within 15 days. So if you are doing this and you receive more than $10,000 worth of tokens through an ISPO, maybe you actually have to report the social security number of Meld. Whatever the fuck that is. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know. So there's all kinds of madness that's in this infrastructure bill. It was never designed to actually be usable. So what this does too is it opens up an interesting innovation because I don't really get involved on the fundraising side of these things. I'm an infrastructure guy and I'm a technology company, and we like seeing all kinds of creativity occur. And in some jurisdictions, you're allowed to be creative. Sweden, you're allowed to be creative. Switzerland, you're allowed to be creative. Singapore, you're allowed to be creative. In other jurisdictions, regulation is very unclear. So what a lot of people are doing is they're ring fencing the United States. We saw this, for example, with eToro. They said, all right, we have all this staking going on. We're pretty comfortable with ADA. We don't think there's an issue there. But hey, staking ADA, maybe that looks like what Coinbase was trying to do with their tokens. And we're doing all this stuff. So all that stuff that offers yield, we're just going to take a step back from it because we don't know. We don't know where the regulations sit. Who knows? And we'll just wait it out because it's a small part of our business. We don't take the risk. These types of things. So what's going to end up happening because of the infrastructure bill and because of innovations like the ISPO model, airdrops, other things like that, and reporting requirements, is that you kind of have to create a U.S. standard under U.S. law, and then you have to create a standard for the rest of the world. It's very sad that this is where we're at, but unfortunately, this is what U.S. regulators are pushing us towards, unless legislation reverses that. And hopefully, we can get that done. And a lot of people are starting to set up a lot of lobbying, and bills are going to be dropping, hopefully, to harmonize these two things. But if they don't, we have something called SIPs. So here's the SIP repo. You see Cardano Foundation, it's their repository. And the CIP, and we have from 1 all the way up to 30. And actually, we've just pushed some more SIPs that are specifically related to Plutus. And some are community led, some are led by our engineers. Like, for example, SIP 30 is a community led one, and that involves a DApp connector for browser based wallets. And I think SIP 13 is the one that we proposed for. Let's see here, proposed URI scheme for ADA transfer. And this was written by Sebastian, actually. Maybe it's SIP 19 is the one. A structure of addresses in Cardano in the Shelley era. I'll have to look it up, maybe SIP 21. But there's one actually for magic links in Cardano. All right. So anyway, what we're going to do is write a SIP. And the SIP is going to be for an optional delegation payload. So SIP X, we don't know what number it'll be. And basically it's an optional delegation payload. So if you're a stake pool operator, you have cryptographic credentials, which means you have a notion of a public key. So what you can do is you can do the following. As part of your delegation, if you're Bob, to, let's say, Alice's stake pool, you can take her public key and then you can encrypt a DID. Okay. And you can send that DID as metadata in the delegation transaction. Okay. So you have the transaction and then you have some metadata with it. And basically, what happens is that that metadata can only be decrypted by the person with the corresponding private key, which is Alice. So it's kind of like a bit message idea, Alice's private key. And then she can look at that DID, and then she can, whoever has authenticated that DID, look at the KYC information. Now, this accomplishes two things. One, is that if you want to do an ISPO, what you can say is unless you include a DID that proves you're not US, you're not under US jurisdiction, and somebody has checked that, you don't get any tokens. So that's one way that you actually can offshore an ISPO through a delegation transaction, and it's self-serving. Basically, people have to have a DID in the metadata, and if they don't have it, it doesn't have that information. Okay, so you can get very rich customer profiles, but actually it preserves privacy pretty well because if it's encrypted DID, the only people who can look at that DID would be basically the stake pool operator. And you also include some metadata giving authorization for some unblinding because just because you have a DID doesn't necessarily mean you can look at the KYC information. So you could look at KYC providers like Accurate and you can include a passphrase or something that gives them the authorization to unblind some of the data that's associated with it. So you have two layers of protection. You have the encryption of the DID, and for whatever reason, if those keys are compromised, you still could use a DID alias, and that alias would only be unblinded if the passphrase is given or something like that. So you can have multi layers of protection. So we're going to write some sort of SIP for this because at the moment, this is the only way for U.S. people to comply with the current infrastructure bill regulation. I don't like it. I don't approve of it, but it is what it is. And this is why we lobbied so hard. We called dozens of senators. We fought very hard for these things. And the good news is because we future-proofed the design of Cardano, it's actually fairly straightforward on how you would create an opt-in system. Okay, so you can optionally put a DID into the metadata, encrypt it so that only the stake pool operator can see it, and create an unblinding process with the KYC entity. So there's some degree of privacy there. We're going to explore these dynamics and try to think about these things. Unfortunately, that only solves the problem of the ISPO. It does not solve the issue of full compliance with the infrastructure bill because basically every single delegator has to provide this information for the stake pool operator to have an audit log to prove to the US regulator that they actually have collected KYC information on all US citizens. It's not possible to do that, and there's no way to design Cardano to force this on the user without hyper centralization of the system. So, in other words, no cryptocurrency, Ethereum 2, Polkadot, Tezos, Algorand, Cardano, that uses some notion of delegation and staking can be in compliance with the infrastructure bill as written, even if we have an optional metadata field like this. ISPOs, if your goal is to have a regulated, an exempt offshore offering like a Reg S for these things, it does appear that the optional method can do it because what you can do is say you only get tokens if you include a valid DID. And you can go through a registration step like that, and you can actually make it pretty easy to do with an identity center. So a lot of fundraising innovation can be done here, but unfortunately, under current U.S. law, it's just not clear. Everything's very milky. So the good news is that we're going to try real hard to undo the damage that the infrastructure bill has done to our industry, which is catastrophic. And by the way, these reporting requirements go beyond just stake pools, under a cursory reading of their definition of broker, if you run a full node, because full nodes process and validate transactions, technically, if you read it in a certain way, all full nodes of every cryptocurrency in the entire industry, including Bitcoin full nodes, have a reporting requirement to report information on every transaction that they process, every single one. And there might even be a criminal component with this, because you may, for Bitcoin transactions that are larger than $10,000, crypto transactions larger than $10,000, have to report the social security number of the sender as an intermediary. And if you can't do that, then basically you've committed a crime under the infrastructure bill, this provision that was put in. That's what they gave us in the United States. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd and horrible. So we can innovate to allow ring fencing of an opt-in system and make it optional. And we're going to write this spec as a CIP and include it. And I think it'll enable offshore ISPOs, and it'll be a real cool thing to do. But we can't really do anything to solve the infrastructure bill problem. It's a ubiquitous issue for our entire industry, and devastating if it's read in a draconian way. The good news is that we're going to try real hard to try to undo it. And there's a very good probability that there's bipartisan support to do that. Take a few months to work its way through. Nothing takes effect until 2023. And the IRS has indicated that they probably won't have a strict interpretation of the stupid draconian law that's in there. But it is what it is. But I did want to make this video to talk a little bit about how you can merge standards, optional stuff, innovations and fundraising, and technology in a way that kind of allows you to have your cake and eat it too. This idea of doing an ISPO is very innovative, but buyer beware. It probably is, because the tokens issued are going to be used for project capital. There's a good probability that that probably can be used as a argued under the Howey test that it's a securities offering, unless the product is completely finished and usable from day one, in which case it's a little bit more debatable. But the good news is that many jurisdictions will still let you do that or don't care. The problem is the U.S. jurisdiction probably does. And if that's the case, you need some way of distinguishing U.S. from non-U.S. participants, and layering things like our metadata standard, DIDs, KYC, and using clever applications of cryptography. You can have a situation that when you delegate to somebody, a payload goes to that stake pool operator or is visible to that stake pool operator, and then they basically can decrypt it. What's nice is that this is actually something, because delegation transactions are on the blockchain, you don't actually have to send them to anybody. There's no notion of an IP address, because the delegatee, the stake pool, can actually just parse the blockchain and decrypt the encrypted payloads, collect all of them, parse those if they're written in a standard way, and then glean whatever information they need to glean out of that. By the way, this goes beyond regulatory compliance. This can also include sweepstakes, addresses to send NFTs to, other things, like, for example, subscribe to our newsletter. You could encrypt an email address inside your metadata payload. And when they decrypt that, they can actually parse that and send it to it. So any type of opt-in, signing a hash, for example, so that, like signing a contractual relationship with a particular stake pool operator, these types of things. So I think there's a great use case of having an optional metadata flag that you can encrypt and saturate and then post in your transaction in order to receive some relationship with the stake pool operator. And I think that's a way of bringing the ISPOs into at least a ring fence around the United States until the regulatory clarity has come. It's frustrating at times, I have to admit. We're out here trying to innovate, we're trying to build, and it just sometimes feels like people who don't really know what's going on have a lot of say over things we do. But remember, the pioneers of the past were dealing with an internet that they had the National Science Foundation acceptable use policy that forbade e-commerce until 1992. So you couldn't sell stuff online until the early 90s, and using infrastructure in the United States. It was only after they repealed that you could have Amazon and all these other things. And there were a lot of real hard times back in the day. It wasn't really clear what was going on there either. So every time you have a pioneering industry where things are being changed, it is very difficult, unfortunately, for that industry to get where it needs to go. Take some time, and that's okay. That's okay. It's not necessarily the worst problem in the world. You just have to be patient and you have to work your way through it. So part of it is education, part of it is lobbying, part of it is technological innovation, part of it is compromise, and some cases ring fencing. And that means certain countries are going to be left behind. China, for example, has taken a very draconian view on cryptocurrencies, as has India. And in both cases, this has taken two economies which should be powerhouses for different reasons in crypto and removed them from the conversation entirely. 3 billion people basically removed from the conversation because of very bad, in my view, policy decisions. The United States is nowhere near that level of stupidity in terms of policy. And I think it's just a case of where we have to educate, lobby, persuade, and grow. And then over time, we'll be able to get to where we need to go. What I can do from a protocol level is we can write some SIPs and we can figure out how to put data payloads in. And then at least it gives some more tools in the tool bag for stake pool operators to do things. And we can maybe even do reward escrows. We can do all kinds of things. For example, one of the things that you could do is set up a situation where instead of paying directly, the protocol pays an escrow account. And this is probably the most draconian in centralization possible. But basically, a stake pool operator would have a special type of certificate, and rewards get paid to designated escrows. And those rewards are only released once KYC is done. So you could use that to ring fence users. And so you could have a two-tiered system where if they provide a DID that verifies they're non-US, you pay directly. And if they don't provide a DID, or if they're a US, they have to go through an escrow and have the KYC information, and it goes through. I mean, this kind of protocol architecture we're going to actually have to consider if the infrastructure bill doesn't get repealed, the section of it with the broker definition, because I don't really see any other way to get around it with this type of situation. The other problem is that it still doesn't solve the problem of the full node. This is why it's so catastrophic. If you're running a full node, you are part of the ecosystem's backbone. You're taking things, processing things, broadcasting things. A very draconian reading of the bill would indicate a full node is actually a regulated entity. Even though you've done nothing, you don't know any of the people, you're just processing data like a BitTorrent node would be, and you have nothing to do with any exchange of value. You're keeping the protocol running. You're still technically a broker under this definition. Bad regulation all around. And we'll write SIPs and give you guys tools. I'm sure the community will use these tools in all kinds of different ways. For example, the rewards escrow, that could be used in both directions. You could have rewards escrow for SPOs. So instead of the ISPO directly getting your ADA for the fee, you could do a reward escrow where the fee is put into a special account controlled by an auditor, and it gradually funds them as they hit project milestones. That might be one way to hold them accountable for these types of things. So you can put all these kinds of accountability structures on these types of things, and they can be protocol enforced. And so you remove a lot of trust, and upfront what you're getting yourself into. And what I like is gradual escalations in this respect. So it is what it is. Anyway, I hope this video helps a little bit and helps you guys think a little bit around all these issues. They're very complicated. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of things to think about, and I really wish the world was simpler, but we are where we're at. It's a complex world. The good news is that I'm consistently amazed by the level of creativity of the Cardano ecosystem. I remember being in cryptocurrency space a long time ago, and the very first ICO was Mastercoin. And that was about $500,000 was raised off of a Bitcoin Talk forum thread. And the Exodus address private keys were on J.R. Willett's personal computer sitting in his basement. Might even been his mom's basement. I can't remember. And to see how that was the first, how far the industry has gone the level of creativity the industry has had, and just extraordinary amount of value that's been created and flowed from people is just incredible to me. And when you look at things like ISPOs, that's just another example of creativity where they say, okay, well, getting money from people is hard, but maybe we can work together and the fruit of our labors will barter. And you get some of ours and we get some of yours. And who knows which token is going to be more valuable, but it's kind of a swap and we'll see what happens. And just incredible to see that. And it's incredible to see that $1 billion worth of ADA got staked to somebody to actually pursue this end, which will probably end up generating more value for that venture than the entire Ethereum crowd sale, which at the time was the largest ICO ever done. And that's just Tuesday. It's just a day. It's just an event. So keep on looking out there, keep on thinking, and I'd highly encourage everybody to look at the SIP proposal process, the Cardano improvement proposal process. And a lot of these things are active, fluid conversations. Just today, we announced 3 SIPs that are directly related to Plutus that feed stock into the read-only UTXO model and are, I think, going to make it a lot easier for smart contract developers to do things. And we talked to a lot of smart contract developers, and God, they're giving us great advice. That's why we've been talking to the dexes and talking to the stable coins and so forth, just so that we can learn from them. And they have frustrations and they have things they like and things they don't like. And that actually feeds into the improvement process. It's this beautiful loop, and we're all learning together basically how to build out this new model. And it just moves so quickly. It seems like it's a long time, but it wasn't too long ago that the Shelley era was a new thing. Now it's ancient history. And it wasn't too long ago that we never had the ability to process smart contracts, just issue native token. Now you can do smart contracts on Cardano. Uh, and there's a lot of FUD and there's a lot of misinformation, and people go and they actively try to mislead you or they scream at the top of their lungs. But at some point, you just start ignoring the children who are throwing temper tantrums in the toy aisle because they didn't get their cookies, and you move on. And for the most part, there's a lot of maturity in this ecosystem, in this community, and I'm pretty proud of that. I really enjoy the fact that you guys have been not only patient but also persistent and smart. And just the very fact that we can have a conversation about the nature of an ISPO as adults and say, okay, well, how does this fit into the broader regulatory structure? How does this fit into where staking is going? How do you build a different type of relationship with your delegators? And actually, what ends up happening is you may end up solving more problems than one. If you're a socially beneficial stake pool and you're talking to people and saying, hey, I'm going to donate 10% of my fees to clean water or to education or something like that. Well, you have to show the use of funds. Well, if you have a means of getting a subscription from your user through an out of band connection, like an email or a Telegram account or whatever have you, and there's a standard way of signing up, it's very easy to template these types of things and create that kind of radical transparency inside the system. So not all regulation creates problems. In some cases, just thinking around how to resolve that issue creates a reality where you may actually be able to get more capabilities and features and functionality inside your system that end up being used not just for that, but for many things and become a foundational building block for some sort of end, like transparency or whatever have you. So I hope this video was elucidating to everybody. I'm getting back into doing whiteboard videos. I really enjoy them and had a great Thanksgiving. Gout's back in my ankle, so I'm limping around in the office today, but that's okay. And remember, there are no mistakes, just some happy accidents. This is Charles Hoskinson and Bob Ross. And of course, you're asking, Logan the Lobster took him off the mic because he obstructed too much there. Wishing you all a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you guys later. Cheers.